Israel-Palestine issue is the world's most controversial conflict that happened post-World War. The immediate cause of this is the partition of Palestine without the consent of Palestinians. However, this is not the only cause. The cause is much deeper, and for this we have to know what happened in what had been happening in Palestine for the several years. As I have said that this is a controversial topic. So many people have extreme views on this particular issue. So on one hand, there are people who believe that there should be absolute Jewish state, and on the other hand, there are people who believe that the state of Israel should not exist. So these are very extreme viewpoints regarding this particular issue, and there are some people, few minorities, who believe that since both of them have a stake over this land, so in that case this land so in that case both these people should coexist together, and the best way possible is to have a two-nation theory, which suggests that there should be an Arab state for the Palestinian and there should be a Jewish state for the Israelis. Though of late, Israel-Palestine conflict has not been getting any attention, though there has been atrocities that is happening on Palestinian on a regular basis. But one thing had changed everything when Hamas allegedly kidnapped the civilians and they kept them as hostages. And from this, the whole mainstream media got the attention of this particular issue. To understand the context behind it, we got to know the history of this land, the history of the Palestine, and much more. So in this episode, we will cover historical background, the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, then birth of Zionism, then the idea of the state of Israel, Balfour Declaration, creation of Israel, and first Israel-Arab war, and we will end with the tragedy of Nakba. Let's have a look at the history behind it. Palestine is a small region of land that has played a prominent role in the ancient and the modern history of the Middle East. It is believed by scholars that the name Palestine is derived from the name given by the people who occupied this particular region in the 12th century BC. As per the ancient Hebrew Bible, it is believed that the Jews lived in this land, which included the kingdom of Israel and Judah, which was established by King David and his descendants around 1000 BC. This land had endured numerous invasions starting from Babylonians, Persians, Romans. It came under the Muslim control when Jerusalem fell under Rashidun Caliphate in 637 AD, and there had a continuous fight between Christians and Muslims for Jerusalem, and lastly it was ruled by the Ottoman Turks till 1917, and then after, when the World War ended in 1918, Palestine came under the British Empire. The League of Nations issued a British mandate for Palestine, a document that gave the Britain administrative control over the region, included the provision for the Jewish national homeland in Palestine, which went into effect in 1923. In this section, we will understand that what led the Jews migrate from Palestine to Europe and then back to Palestine. So the reason behind is invasion, famine, and war had forced the Jews to take shelter in Europe. But during the 19th century, the rise of anti-Semitism happened, because of which the Jews had to look back the option of coming back to their homeland, which they say is Palestine. So there are few incidents that shocked the Jews who are living there, and they were very worried about their security. So these incidents are on record. So the first incident that happened in Russia, which is in the Imperial Russia, the pogroms. Pogroms means the slaughterer. They targeted Jews in 1800s. So in France, there was a case of Dreyfus affair. In this case, what happened was a Jewish soldier was falsely convicted of treachery, that he passed vital information to Germans, and this highlighted the anti-Semitic sentiment that was quite prevalent in Europe during that period of time. So all these incidents were the breeding grounds for the feeling that the Jews should have their own homeland. And this was how the Zionism was born. In 1896, Theodor Herzl, in 1896, Theodor Herzl published a pamphlet called Der Judenschaft, where he described that his vision for the Jewish nation. And with this pamphlet, he gained so much popularity that he was called the father of Zionism. Meanwhile, in Ottoman Palestine, the Jews were getting land by bribing the Ottoman officials. While the local residents were poor and illiterate, they were not understanding that what was going on. Ottoman officials tried to stop this sale of land to the foreign Jews, but this was never implemented. And when in 1908, young Turks revolted and overthrew the Ottoman Sultan, with that, more and more Jews came in this land. While this was going on, World War broke out and Ottoman Empire was fighting against the Allied forces. So to weaken the Ottoman Empire, Britain approached the Arab population and gave them the dream of Arab land where the Arab nationalism could prevail. And for that, the Britishers chose Muhammad as an ideal candidate to disrupt the jihad that was called by the Ottomans in 1914. And now let's look at the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration was a letter written by the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lionel Rothschild, where he expressed the British government should support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. In the meantime, the Palestinian nationalism was also on rise, and they opposed the growing Jews' influence in that region. And after the defeat of the Ottoman Turks in World War I, Palestine fell under the British mandate. Now let's have a look at how the Israel was created. Initially, Britain and USA were not in favor of creation of two different states, Arab and a Jewish state. United States supported the Balfour Declaration of 1917, where establishment of a separate Jewish state was mentioned. And President Franklin D. Roosevelt had assured the Arabs in 1945 that the United States would not intervene without consulting both of the stockholders, Jews and Arabs, in that region. And the British wanted to preserve the good relations with the Arabs to protect their the political and the economic interest in the region. But the things have changed when President Truman took the office and he appointed several experts to study the Palestine issue. And in the summer of 1946, the Truman established a special cabinet committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Henry F. Soon after the President Truman took the office, he appointed several experts to study the Palestine issue. In the summer of 1946, the Truman established a special cabinet committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Henry F. Grady, an assistant secretary of the state, who entered into the negotiations with a parallel British committee to discuss the future of Palestine. And in 1946, Truman eventually declared the creation of a Jewish state. Throughout 1947, United Nations Commission of Palestine examined the Palestine question and the recommendation of the partition into a Jewish and Arab state.
At Flushing, Long Island, the General Assembly of the United Nations has made its decision on Palestine. The map shows what partition means. The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized. There was heated debate in the Assembly. This is the delegate from Saudi Arabia arguing against partition.
On November 29, 1947, United Nations adopted a resolution 181. In this resolution, Palestine would get divided into two different states, the Arab and the Jewish state, while the Jerusalem will remain under the UN. The Palestinian Arabs refused to recognize this arrangement made by the UN, which they regarded as favorable to the Jews and unfair to Palestinian. UN resolution sparked controversy between the Jews and Arab groups within Palestine. The fighting began with attack by the irregular bands of Palestinian Arabs attached to the local units of the Arab Liberation Army, which was composed of the volunteers from Palestine and neighboring Arab countries. Arab Liberation Army launched attacks on the Jewish cities and settlements. The Jewish forces were composed of the Haganah and the underground militia of the Jewish community in Palestine. The goal of the Palestinian was to prevent the partition plan. On the eve of the British forces withdrawal from the Palestine, on the eve of the withdrawal of the British forces from Palestine, that is on May 15, 1948, Israel declared their independence, and soon after it, Egypt launched an attack on Israel, and with that, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon occupied areas of the southern and eastern Palestine. And this was how the first Arab-Israel war had begun. Now, while this war was going on, a tragedy broke out in Palestine, and which was called as Nakba. So, Nakba means catastrophe. It refers to the day when the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians happened. On that day, when the state of Israel was established, which that forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to be expelled or uprooted from their homeland. From 1947 to 1949, 750,000 Palestinians were made refugees. Zionist forces allegedly destroyed 78% of the historic Palestine, and in the process of the ethnic cleansing, they destroyed 530 villages, cities, and killed about 15,000 Palestinians in a series of the mass atrocities which include more than 70 massacres. So the Jews might have come into that place, but they brought destruction with them as well. And with this, the Palestinian became marginalized, and Palestinians lost their homelands, they lost their homes, and now they were forced into becoming refugees in their own homeland. So this is the first episode of the Arab-Israel war that happened. That I'm talking in this episode. I have talked about the context. Again, we will move further. We will talk about the second Arab-Israel war, and the more episodes are coming up regarding this particular topic. So stay tuned.